Lila always said the sky was the only place that ever made sense to her. She grew up near a small airfield, watching planes come and go while the world on the ground felt too complicated, too heavy. When she got her pilot's license, she didn't dream about luxury jets or commercial airlines. She wanted to fly where people needed help the most. She started working for a small humanitarian group that delivered food, medicine, and supplies to disaster zones. It wasn't glamorous work, long hours, dangerous conditions, and barely enough pay to live on, but she didn't care. What mattered to her was seeing people's faces when she landed somewhere remote and handed them hope wrapped in a box. She became known for her calm under pressure. If there was a storm, she flew through it. If a runway was barely long enough, she still managed to land.
Her co-pilot, a quiet man named Devin, used to say she had a sixth sense when she flew, that she could feel the air shift before the instruments even registered it. Then one day,
she volunteered for a mission no one else wanted. The region was tense, the airspace unstable, and several aid flights had already been turned back. But there were thousands of families trapped without food or medical help. Lila insisted she'd make it. Her supervisor begged her to wait for clearance, but she just smiled and said, "They can't wait." The morning she left, the sky was heavy with clouds. Devin was supposed to go with her, but he'd fallen ill the night before. She told him to rest, promising she'd be back by sunset. He watched her from the edge of the tarmac as her plane lifted off, its silver wings disappearing into the mist. It would be the last time anyone saw her. At first, everything seemed normal. Her voice came through the radio as she reported clear skies at altitude. She talked about the landscape below, how peaceful it looked from above despite the chaos on the ground. Then an hour later, her voice crackled once more, faint, almost drowned in static. She said she was adjusting course to avoid incoming weather. After that, silence. The control tower tried again and again to reach her. No response. The radar showed her last known position over a dense stretch of forest near the border. Then the signal vanished completely. Within hours, a search operation was launched. Devin joined the rescue team, his face pale and drawn. Helicopters scanned the area, and ground teams hiked through rough terrain, calling her name. Days passed. No wreckage. No signal. Nothing. It was as if her plane had dissolved into the sky. The official report called it an unresolved disappearance. Investigators said strong winds could have forced her off course or that her instruments might have failed. Some believed the plane had gone down in hostile territory, where rescuers couldn't reach. Others whispered darker theories, that she'd been captured, or that the mission had been more than just a delivery run. But to those who knew her, the simplest truth was the hardest to accept. She was gone. Her family refused to believe it. Her younger brother Daniel searched every report, every satellite image, hoping for a sign. He spent months writing letters to agencies, governments, and journalists, but the trail always ended the same way, with silence. Her organization held a memorial for her 6 months later. A framed photo of her stood by the runway, surrounded by candles and flowers. Devin spoke that day, his voice trembling as he said she was the kind of person who ran toward danger when others ran away. After the service, he stayed behind, staring at the empty runway until night fell. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there somewhere. 5 years passed. The world moved on, but Daniel didn't. He kept her old flight logs and notebooks stacked neatly in a box by his bed. Sometimes late at night he'd open them and trace his fingers over her handwriting. She had written everything: routes, weather notes, sketches of the villages she'd visited. It felt like pieces of her still lived on those pages. The last entry in her logbook was dated the day before her disappearance. It said simply, "Flight 147 supplies, don't forget the water filters. It's going to be rough." Underneath, she had drawn a tiny symbol of wings, something she always doodled when she felt anxious. One evening, Daniel went to visit Devin. The years had not been kind to him. He had left flying altogether and spent most of his time fixing old engines in his garage. When Daniel asked if he still thought about that day, Devin nodded. "Every time I hear a plane overhead," he said, "I still expect her to call in." They sat in silence for a while. Then Devin handed him an old radio headset, the one Lila had used on her last flight. "I never turned it in," he said quietly. "Couldn't bring myself to." Daniel took it, feeling the worn leather against his palm, and for a moment it felt like she was close again. The world had changed in those 5 years. Conflicts had spread, and aid routes were tighter than ever. Many of the regions Lila once flew to were now completely inaccessible. Her disappearance became one of those unsolved stories that people remembered only in passing, the brave pilot who vanished without a trace. But to Daniel, it was never over. He often dreamed of her flying low over the trees, searching for a place to land. In his dreams, she always looked calm, focused, unafraid, just like she always was. He'd wake up and stare at the old photo on his wall, whispering, "Where did you go?" Then one day something strange happened. A reporter covering a crisis in a remote border area shared a blurry video online. It showed a small cargo plane, old and dented, swooping down through thick smoke to drop aid packages. The video lasted only a few seconds before cutting off, but something about the way the plane moved caught Daniel's eye. It was the same kind of aircraft Lila had flown, and painted faintly near the tail, almost invisible in the dust, was a small symbol. 2 wings, the same symbol she had drawn in her notebook. He froze. It could have been coincidence, but deep down something told him it wasn't. His hand shook as he replayed the video over and over. When he zoomed in, he could almost see a figure in the cockpit. It was impossible to tell who it was, but the shape, the posture, it looked like her. Daniel sent the video to Devin that night. The message came back almost instantly. "That's her," Devin wrote. "It has to be." For the first time in years, Daniel felt his heart race with something that wasn't grief. Hope. Weak, uncertain, but real. He began digging into every report from that area. There were mentions of a ghost pilot, someone who flew into war zones without clearance, delivering supplies and vanishing before anyone could make contact. Soldiers said the plane came and went like a shadow. Refugees said the pilot never spoke, only dropped food and water before flying off into the smoke. The next morning, Daniel stood at the old airfield where she used to take off. The hangar was empty now, the paint peeling. But when he looked at the sky, he felt the same wind she must have felt that last day. Somewhere out there, a plane was flying low over danger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his sister was still behind the stick. He didn't know it yet, but that video would change everything, not just for him, but for the world that thought she was gone. Because sometimes people don't disappear, they just choose to keep flying where others would never dare to go. After the blurry video surfaced online, Daniel couldn't sleep. Every night he stared at his computer screen, replaying the footage, zooming in on the plane, trying to catch every small detail. The more he watched, the more convinced he became that the pilot was Lila. But how could it be possible? 5 years had passed. Everyone believed she was gone. He didn't know if he was chasing a miracle or just holding on to a desperate hope, but he couldn't stop. He reached out to journalists who had been covering that conflict zone. At first, they laughed it off. A missing pilot suddenly reappearing as a ghost in a war zone. It sounded like a conspiracy theory. But Daniel was persistent. He showed them the video, described Lila's distinctive habits, how she always checked her left wing twice before landing, how she hummed softly while flying, how she always carried a small journal tucked into the cockpit. One journalist, an older man who had spent decades covering dangerous zones, listened quietly. He didn't promise anything, but he agreed to look into local contacts. Within a week, small reports started trickling in. Villagers in remote border areas spoke in hushed tones about a mysterious pilot who arrived without warning, dropping aid into towns that had been cut off for months. They described a woman, though they had never seen her face clearly, who landed a small cargo plane, distributed food and medicine, and then vanished into the horizon. The descriptions matched Lila perfectly. She always moved quietly, never asking for recognition. She had a mission and nothing else mattered. Daniel felt a mixture of relief and fear. If it was her, she had survived alone in places he couldn't imagine. She had been living in the shadows, saving people who had been forgotten by the world. He shared the information with Devin. They both spent hours mapping possible flight routes and locations. Devin remembered Lila telling him about hidden valleys and unmarked airstrips that could handle small planes. He had dismissed them at the time as jokes, but now, seeing the reports, he realized she might have been planning for survival all along. Daniel couldn't stay away. He booked a trip to the nearest safe zone, following the trail of the ghost pilot. The journey was long and exhausting. He traveled by bus, jeep, and sometimes on foot, avoiding checkpoints and danger zones. Each place he visited, he asked quietly about a mysterious pilot. People would glance at him suspiciously, then shake their heads. But slowly the pattern emerged. They knew of the plane. They knew of the deliveries. And though no one had seen the pilot clearly, everyone spoke of her kindness. In one village, an old man showed him a tattered map. He marked locations where a small cargo plane had landed over the past few months. Daniel's heart raced as he traced the marks. They formed a route deep into regions no aid workers dared to enter. His hand shook. She wasn't just surviving, she was actively helping people. She had built a life entirely around flying where others were too afraid. At night, in small, dimly lit inns, Daniel heard stories that seemed almost impossible. One woman spoke of a flight that landed during a firefight. The pilot had dropped supplies while bullets whizzed past, and the villagers had barely had time to grab them before she was gone. Another man said the plane had swooped down in a thick fog, delivering medicine to children trapped in a mountain village. Each story seemed more incredible than the last, but the consistency of the details convinced Daniel she was real. The closer he got, the more he realized how difficult it would be to reach her. She had not only survived but had become almost invisible. She knew the land, the skies, and the danger better than anyone. She never stayed in one place long enough for anyone to track her. And yet Daniel could feel her presence in every story, in every flight path, in every whisper of hope she left behind. During one stop, Daniel met a young refugee boy who had been saved by the mysterious pilot. The boy's eyes lit up when he described her. He didn't know her name, but he remembered her voice, calm and gentle, and how she had handed him a bag of food without saying a word. The boy had asked if she would come back, and Daniel's heart broke as he realized that some people had been waiting for her all this time. Not knowing if she would ever return, Daniel knew he couldn't just tell her story. He needed to find her. But the more he searched, the more he understood the risk. If she saw outsiders too close, she might disappear again. She had built a life that was meant to be unseen, to avoid being caught in the conflicts she navigated. Yet he couldn't ignore the pull of hope. She was alive, and somewhere out there, people owed their lives to her courage. He spent nights piecing together flight records, satellite images, and reports from locals. Each detail was a clue, a puzzle that might lead him to her. He realized that finding her wouldn't be easy and that she might not want to be found. But the idea of leaving her life in the shadows, unknown to her own family, was unbearable. Then a breakthrough. A journalist sent him a message. Someone had spotted a small plane landing in a hidden valley near the edge of a war zone. The aircraft had markings that matched Lila's style, a faint symbol painted near the tail, almost invisible unless seen closely. Daniel's hands trembled as he stared at the photo. He could barely make out the outline of the cockpit, but something in the posture, the way the pilot leaned forward, seemed familiar. It was her. He knew it. He booked a flight to the nearest airfield that could get him close. From there, he would have to continue on foot, risking exposure to both conflict and harsh terrain. Every mile he traveled, he thought about her. How brave she had been, how she had survived, how many lives she must have saved. The thought of finally seeing her, even from a distance, kept him moving forward. Along the way, Daniel encountered people who had been directly helped by her. A village elder showed him the makeshift landing pad where she had delivered food and medicine. A young girl shared a sketch she had made of the plane, complete with wings and the mysterious symbol. Each encounter reminded him of why she had disappeared in the first place. She hadn't gone away because she wanted to be forgotten. She had gone away to save lives without anyone telling her where she could and could not go. One night, as he camped near a river, Daniel watched the stars and thought about how Lila must have felt up there in the sky. Alone, yes, but free. Dangerous, yes, but purposeful. He understood now why she had chosen this life, why she had stayed hidden. She was following a calling stronger than any fear, stronger than any rule, stronger than any threat. The next morning he heard the distant hum of a small aircraft. His heart leapt. Could it be her? He held his breath, scanning the horizon. Through the thin morning mist he saw a silver plane banking low over the hills. It was small, battered, and flying low as if avoiding radar or eyes on the ground. And there, in the cockpit, leaning slightly forward, was a figure he recognized instantly. It was her. Lila. Daniel felt tears welling in his eyes. She had been gone for 5 years, and yet here she was, alive, unstoppable, and still committed to a mission that no one else dared to attempt. The plane disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the faint sound of its engine and the shadow of hope it carried. He knew then that finding her would not be simple. She had chosen a path few could follow, a life outside the rules, a life where danger and compassion intertwined. But he also knew that the world needed to understand what she had done, and that he couldn't stop searching for her now. Somehow, he would reach her. Somehow he would reconnect with the sister who had vanished into the clouds 5 years ago, and had reappeared not for fame, not for glory, but to save the lives that no one else would touch. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel understood this. She had become a force that could not be contained. She had disappeared, but she had not vanished. She had only taken flight into a place that the world had forgotten, and now he was ready to follow her into the unknown. Daniel had followed every clue he could find, but the closer he got to Lila, the more he realized how carefully she had hidden herself. It wasn't just that she disappeared 5 years ago. She had built a life that left almost no trace. Villages she had helped barely remembered her by name, only by the relief and hope she brought with each flight. When he finally reached the edge of the first valley she was reported in, Daniel could see why she had chosen this place. The mountains rose steeply, with cliffs and ridges that made it almost impossible for large aircraft to land. Trees and shrubs grew thickly along the slopes. There were no roads, no villages of note, only small clearings that could serve as makeshift landing pads. From above, it looked almost untouched by the modern world. Daniel moved carefully, relying on the stories he had collected. Each villager's account, each blurry photo, each whispered rumor was a piece of a puzzle. He began recognizing patterns. The small cargo plane always appeared in valleys hidden from the main routes, always after nightfall or during storms, always leaving aid for communities that no other relief organization could reach. He came across a tiny village where he met an older woman who had survived one of Lila's flights. The woman's house was small, with mud walls and a tin roof, but she welcomed him with a cautious smile. She remembered Lila's plane vividly. She described the noise, the sudden rush of wind when it landed, and the careful way the supplies were distributed. Daniel listened intently, taking notes. She spoke about the pilot's calmness, the way she had moved swiftly but gently, never lingering longer than necessary. She never wanted to be seen, the woman said. She came, she helped, and she was gone. It was like she was part of the wind itself. Daniel nodded. That had always been Lila's way. She didn't want recognition, only to help. That was why she had stayed hidden for so long. But Daniel also understood that staying hidden meant she was constantly alone, facing dangers that would terrify almost anyone else. The village elder gave him a crude map, marking the clearings where the plane had landed over the past months. Daniel traced the routes with his finger. They were treacherous, narrow valleys, sharp ridges, unpredictable winds. It was clear she had become an expert in navigating places no one else dared to fly. He could almost see her in the cockpit, eyes scanning the terrain, hands steady on the controls, heart steady even as danger pressed from every side. As he prepared to move to the next location, Daniel was warned by a local guide that the region was increasingly dangerous. Armed groups roamed freely, and travelers could easily be mistaken for spies or enemies. Daniel understood immediately why Lila had chosen this life. She had learned not only to fly, but to survive quietly, unnoticed and unharmed. He spent days moving from valley to valley, piecing together her routes and timing. Every night he camped alone, reviewing his notes and thinking about what she must have endured. How many nights had she flown alone, watching the ground for landing spots in darkness? How many storms had she navigated, unsure if she would make it safely to the villages below? One evening, as he was crossing a narrow ridge, Daniel found remnants of one of her old landing strips. The ground was uneven, the grass worn in a perfect path, almost invisible from above. It was clear someone had worked hard to make it functional, cutting and clearing trees in secret. He realized that these landing spots weren't just improvised. They were carefully maintained and protected. Lila had created a network of hidden airstrips invisible to anyone not paying close attention. Daniel began to understand the full extent of her efforts. She wasn't just delivering aid. She had become a lifeline. Entire communities relied on her flights, and she had done it all without drawing attention. She had built a life entirely outside the reach of the authorities, outside the eyes of anyone who could stop her. She had created a system that depended on trust, timing, and courage. At night, he often thought about how she had survived all these years. She had no official support, no backup team, only her skills and her determination, and yet somehow she had succeeded. He thought about the risks she took, flying into conflict zones, landing on makeshift airstrips, navigating bad weather, avoiding armed groups. Each flight could have ended in disaster, yet she kept going. One morning, as he hiked through a narrow pass, Daniel stumbled across a small airstrip freshly cleared. The markings on the ground were familiar, faint symbols that matched Lila's old flight log doodles. He froze, staring at the field. It was clear that she had been here recently, possibly even within the last few hours. His heart pounded. He was close, closer than he had ever been. Suddenly, he heard the faint sound of a plane engine. He looked up toward the sky, and in the distance, a small cargo plane emerged from the mist, banking low through the narrow valley. His breath caught. He recognized the way it moved, the way it hugged the terrain as if the pilot knew every inch by memory. The plane disappeared behind a ridge, leaving only the faintest echo in the air. Daniel knew she was alive. He could feel it in his bones. Every step he had taken, every story he had heard, every clue he had followed had led him here. She was out there, still flying, still saving lives. He realized she had not only survived, she had thrived. She had carved a life from danger, uncertainty, and courage. Over the next few days, Daniel continued following the trail, meeting more villagers who had been helped by her. One young boy, no older than 12, ran toward him clutching a small box of supplies that had been dropped from her plane. The boy's eyes lit up when Daniel asked about the pilot. He didn't know her name, but he remembered her kindness and bravery. "She came in the night," the boy said. "She gave us food and water. She didn't stay. She just helped and flew away." Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes. It was exactly how Lila had always been, quiet, focused, and utterly selfless. Her presence had changed lives, yet she had never sought recognition. She had built a life on courage, compassion, and a refusal to let danger stop her. By now, Daniel could see that finding her would not be easy. She had intentionally made herself difficult to track. She had learned to avoid people who might slow her down, avoid authorities, avoid anyone who could threaten the mission she had committed her life to. Yet he also knew that she had left small signs, small messages, like breadcrumbs for someone persistent enough to follow. As he studied the terrain and the flight paths, Daniel realized how much she had accomplished in 5 years. She had created a network of hidden landing zones, supplied countless villages, and survived alone in a world most people would never enter. She had become almost mythical in the stories of those she saved. A ghost pilot who appeared from nowhere, delivered hope, and disappeared before anyone could react. Daniel felt a mixture of awe and sorrow. Awe at her courage, her ingenuity, her unwavering determination. Sorrow for the years they had lost, the danger she had faced alone, and the isolation she must have endured. He imagined her nights flying over mountains and valleys, landing on makeshift airstrips, delivering food and medicine, then disappearing into darkness to avoid detection. He thought of the bravery it must have taken to continue despite the risks. Finally, Daniel knew he had to keep moving. He was getting closer. He was tracing the path of her life in these hidden valleys, following the echoes of her flights. Somewhere ahead, she was out there, flying through danger with a mission no one else would dare. He could feel it. She was alive, and she was still fighting for the people who had been forgotten. And he understood for the first time that she had not disappeared out of fear or despair. She had disappeared to take action where others would not. She had vanished not because she was lost, but because she was needed somewhere no one else could go. Daniel pressed on, ready to follow her into the unknown, ready to witness the courage and humanity she had carried in the skies for all those years. Daniel had followed Lila's trail for weeks, moving cautiously through valleys, forests, and narrow mountain passes. Each day brought new signs of her presence, a hidden landing strip, a faint symbol painted on a crate, remnants of supplies left behind. Every clue reminded him how carefully she had built a life that allowed her to help people while remaining unseen. By now, he understood that she had become something more than a pilot. She had become a lifeline, a force that moved where others feared to tread. Villages whispered about her like a legend, speaking of a woman who appeared suddenly, gave what was needed, and vanished before anyone could even ask her name. Then news arrived that shook him to his core. An outbreak of violence had trapped thousands in a city that no aid organizations would enter. Soldiers had abandoned the area. Roads were blocked and the world was watching helplessly. No one could bring supplies, not even the most experienced humanitarian teams. It seemed impossible, until reports came of a small plane landing in the city, dropping food and medicine under heavy fire, and disappearing before anyone could respond. Daniel's heart raced. He recognized the flight pattern immediately. It matched Lila's style, low, precise, fearless. The descriptions from the people who witnessed it spoke of a calm pilot who maneuvered through smoke and bullets with incredible skill. Everyone who saw the plane said the pilot didn't linger, didn't argue, didn't explain, only delivered what was needed and left. He booked the fastest route he could to reach the city, traveling over rough terrain, avoiding checkpoints and moving mostly at night. The closer he got, the more he realized how dangerous this mission had been. Lila had flown into a war zone that no one else dared touch, risking everything to help people who might never know her name. When he arrived at a village near the edge of the city, he found survivors who had received her aid. They described the plane, the supplies, and the courage of the pilot. They spoke of children receiving medicine, families getting food, and villages that were suddenly alive with hope. One woman, clutching a small child, said the pilot had landed while gunfire echoed in the distance. The child had barely understood what was happening, but the woman said she could see the determination in the pilot's movements, the quiet bravery that allowed her to act when everyone else had fled. Daniel realized that Lila's presence had changed the outcome of the crisis. Without her, thousands would have gone hungry or worse. Her actions were not only heroic, they were life-saving in a way that official organizations could never achieve. She had learned to navigate danger, both in the air and on the ground, with a skill and courage that seemed almost impossible. He followed the survivors' directions to the last known landing site. The area was devastated. Buildings burned, streets deserted, a thick layer of smoke hanging in the air. And then he saw it. A small cargo plane, battered but intact, hidden in a clearing. The engine was quiet, but the markings were unmistakable. Faint symbols on the fuselage, the same symbols Lila had always used. Daniel's hands shook as he approached. He didn't know if she was inside or if she had already flown off to another village. He moved cautiously, aware that armed groups could be nearby, that danger still lurked even in this remote spot. Every instinct told him to be careful, but his heart told him to keep going. Then he heard a sound that made him stop in his tracks. A soft humming, almost like a song, coming from inside the plane. It was faint but familiar. His chest tightened. Could it really be her? He approached slowly, trying not to make any noise. Through the open cockpit window, he saw her, Lila. She was checking the controls, preparing for another flight. Her eyes were focused, steady, full of determination. She didn't look up at him, didn't even notice he was there. Daniel watched silently, tears forming in his eyes. She was alive. She had survived everything and was still doing what she had always done, helping people no one else would risk saving. He realized how much she had changed. The woman he saw was stronger, sharper, more determined than ever. Her time alone in the war zone had hardened her in some ways, but it had also sharpened her purpose. Every movement was precise, calculated, and deliberate. She was no longer just a pilot. She had become a symbol of courage and hope for everyone she touched. Daniel wanted to call out to her, to tell her he had found her, but he hesitated. He didn't want to disrupt her work, didn't want to scare her away. He knew she had been hiding all these years for a reason, and he understood now why she had chosen this life. She had taken responsibility for the lives of those who had no one else to help them, and she had done it quietly with no expectation of recognition. Over the next few hours, Daniel watched as she completed her preparations. She loaded supplies, checked the fuel, and reviewed maps with meticulous care. Every action reflected the years of experience she had gained in solitude. He realized that she had not only survived, but she had become more capable, more skilled, and more fearless than ever. Finally, she started the engine. The sound was loud, echoing through the valley, and Daniel felt a surge of emotion. He wanted to rush forward to finally speak to her, to tell her how much he had missed her, but he stayed back, watching as she taxied the plane toward the makeshift runway. The plane lifted off, cutting through the smoke and debris of the city. Daniel followed from a distance, moving carefully through the streets, trying to keep sight of her. He could see her navigating the narrow airspace, avoiding obstacles, and heading toward villages that were still in danger. Every turn, every maneuver was precise, controlled, and fearless. As she dropped supplies over the first village, Daniel saw the relief on the faces of the people below. They waved, shouted, and some even ran toward the packages, tears in their eyes. He realized that this was the life she had chosen, a life of risk, sacrifice, and courage. She had disappeared not to escape, but to serve, to help, to be the person who could go where no one else would. When the plane disappeared over the next ridge, Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. He had seen her, confirmed she was alive, and witnessed the impact of her actions firsthand. He understood now that she had not vanished in the way everyone had feared. She had taken flight into a world of danger and responsibility, a world that only she could navigate. As night fell, Daniel camped near the edge of the city. He thought about the people she had saved, the children who would eat because of her bravery, the families who had medicine and clean water thanks to her courage. He realized that her disappearance had not been a tragedy. It had been a choice to dedicate herself fully to saving others no matter the cost. He knew the journey was not over. She was still out there flying from village to village, risking everything. But he also knew that finding her again, connecting with her and understanding the life she had built was possible. She had left signs, small messages, and evidence of her work, and he was determined to follow them. Daniel watched the stars that night, thinking about how small one person could seem in a world of chaos, yet how much impact they could have. Lila had disappeared, but she had not vanished. She had chosen to move through danger, to help those who had no hope, and to do it with courage that few could imagine. He understood now that her disappearance had been her way of flying free, following a mission that mattered more than recognition, more than comfort, more than life itself. As he drifted to sleep, Daniel made a promise to himself. He would follow her. He would reach her, not to stop her, not to ask her to come home, but to understand her, to support her, and to witness the bravery of someone who had taken on the impossible and turned it into hope for thousands. And somewhere, high above, Lila flew into the night, her plane cutting through danger with grace and precision, unaware that her brother was tracing her path, following her through the sky she had chosen as her own.